He could sing for millions, but he shattered for one question. Broken heart, multiple musical notes, loudly crying face. A world-famous singer collapses on stage when one question cracks his armor, unraveling love, trauma, and the truth behind his perfect voice. Do you still need me? The question cut through the stadium louder than the roar of 70,000 people, sharper than the note trembling in his throat, and in that split second the lights blurred into white scars as his knees buckled and the song died in his mouth. He had sung through storms of cameras and crowds before, through fever and heartbreak and the suffocating weight of expectations, but this single sentence whispered into the open air shattered him in a way no high note ever could. The band faltered, the drummer missing a beat, the guitar whining into feedback as the man at center stage clutched the microphone like it was the last thing tethering him to the ground. Sweat slid down his spine, cold despite the heat, and his breath came out wrong, jagged, as if his lungs had forgotten their rhythm. Someone called his name from backstage. Someone else laughed nervously in the front row, thinking it was part of the show. He tasted iron and salt, the smell of ozone from the lights mixing with the faint scent of smoke machines, and all he could see, past the glare, past the sea of faces, was the one person who had asked. The memory hit him not as a thought but as a physical blow, dragging him backward through time even as the present screamed for him to stand. He learned early how to hide behind his voice. As a boy, he practiced scales until his fingers ached and his jaw locked, humming quietly at night so his mother wouldn't hear the cracks in his confidence. He learned that applause could drown out fear, that perfection could keep questions at bay. On stage, he was untouchable. Off it, he counted his steps, lined his shoes just so, washed his hands too often, as if order could keep the past from leaking in. The past had a name, and it was the same one burning in his chest now. Back in the stadium, he forced air into his lungs and straightened, the mic trembling as he raised it. The crowd roared, grateful for movement, and the screens caught his face too closely, eyes glassy, jaw tight, the telltale tick at the corner of his mouth he could never quite control when he was afraid. He opened his mouth to sing and nothing came out. Silence spread, thick and merciless. He closed his eyes, and the world narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat and the echo of that question. Do you still need me? He remembered the first time he'd heard it, years ago in a quiet practice room that smelled of dust and coffee. He'd been nobody then, voice raw, hands shaking as he sang to the wall. The other man, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, with a habit of worrying the edge of his sleeve, had listened without interrupting, then asked gently, almost shyly, as if afraid of the answer. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea disguised as humility. Back then, the answer had been easy. Yes. Always fame complicated everything. Success sharpened old insecurities into knives. He began to fear that needing someone made him weak, that love was a distraction he couldn't afford. He hid behind schedules and rehearsals, behind jokes and charm, pushing the one person who saw him without the lights just far enough away to pretend it was mutual. On stage now, the present pressed in. He felt hands at his elbow, a familiar voice murmuring, "We've got you," but the words slid off him. He lowered the microphone, the metal cold against his palm, and finally looked again, really looked, toward the edge of the stage where the question had come from. The man stood there, not dramatic, not demanding attention, just waiting, eyes shining with something dangerously close to resignation. The crowd faded to a distant hum. The singer's chest ached, not from lack of air but from the realization blooming painfully clear. He had sung for millions, but he had never answered the one question that mattered. His voice, when it came, was unamplified, fragile, carried only by the hush that had fallen as if the world itself leaned in. "I didn't know how to say it," he admitted, the truth scraping his throat raw. "I was afraid if I needed you, I'd lose myself." A beat. The smell of sweat and electricity. The feel of the stage vibrating under his feet. The answer came without words, in the way the other man stepped closer, not crossing the line, just enough to be seen. The way he nodded once, slow and steady, like someone who had made peace with uncertainty but still hoped. Something inside the singer loosened, a knot he'd carried for years finally giving way. He lifted the microphone again, not to perform but to confess, and when he sang this time, the note wavered, imperfect and alive. It wasn't for the cameras or the charts. It was for the space between two people who had hurt each other by being afraid. The song ended not with thunderous applause but with a quiet, collective exhale. He stood there, tears streaking down his face, unashamed, and for the first time he understood that strength wasn't the absence of need but the courage to name it. He stepped off the stage to meet the man who had asked the question, the lights dimming behind him, the echo of his voice still hanging in the air. The crowd would remember the night he broke, the headlines would speculate and spin, but the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. That he could sing for millions, but he had shattered for one question, and in answering it at last, he felt himself begin, slowly, to heal. The hallway behind the stage smelled like sweat, metal, and something burned, as if the air itself had been scorched by what just happened. The roar of the crowd was muffled here, reduced to a distant, restless animal pacing behind concrete walls. He walked fast, almost running, heart still hammering like it wanted to escape his ribs, the echo of his own unfinished song ringing in his ears. Wait. The word came sharp, breathless, and it stopped him mid-step. He turned. The man stood a few meters away, eyes dark, jaw set, hands clenched at his sides like he was holding himself back from either leaving or breaking something. For a second, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was louder than the stadium had ever been. You said it on stage, the man finally said, voice low, controlled in that dangerous way that meant it wasn't calm at all. In front of everyone. After years of saying nothing. I didn't plan it, he replied, hating how small his voice sounded now without the microphone. I just couldn't lie anymore. A humorless laugh escaped the other man. You think that was honesty? You disappeared for months. You built walls so high I couldn't see you anymore. And now you decide to confess when the world is watching. The words hit hard because they were true. He dragged a hand through his damp hair, a nervous habit he'd never managed to shake. I thought if I kept us separate, I could protect you. Protect myself. From what? The man snapped, stepping closer. From loving me? The question burned worse than the first one had. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally forced the truth out. From needing you more than the applause. From realizing that without you, all of this, he gestured vaguely toward the stage, the lights, the noise, means nothing. For a moment, anger flashed across the man's face, hot and bright. Then it cracked, giving way to something raw and exhausted. Do you have any idea what it's like, he said quietly, to love someone who belongs to the world before he belongs to himself? Those words cut deeper than shouting ever could. He remembered the nights he'd come home too late, smelling of smoke and champagne, collapsing into bed without explaining where he'd been. He remembered the way he'd flinched when asked simple questions, how he'd learned to deflect intimacy with jokes and silence. I'm scared, he admitted, voice breaking. Every time I step on that stage, I feel like I'm one wrong note away from being replaced. One mistake away from losing everything. I didn't want you to see me like that. I saw you anyway, the man replied. I always saw you. A staff member passed at the far end of the hallway, glancing at them with curiosity before hurrying away. The world was closing in again, but neither of them moved. You hum when you're anxious, the man continued softly. Always the same 3 notes. You line your shoes perfectly when you're pretending you're okay. And when you're lying, you won't look at me. He felt exposed, stripped bare by someone who knew him too well. Then why did you ask? He whispered. Why ask if I still need you, knowing it could destroy me? Because I needed to know if I should stay, came the answer, immediate and brutal. Or finally walk away. The thought of that, of empty mornings and silent rooms, of singing without that familiar presence anchoring him, made his chest seize. He stepped closer without thinking, the space between them shrinking until he could feel the warmth of the other man's body. Don't go, he said, the words tumbling out raw and unpolished. I don't know how to do this right. I don't know how to balance fame and fear and love. But I know that losing you would break me in ways no crowd ever could. The man searched his face, eyes flicking over every tremor, every crack. Words are easy now, he said. What happens tomorrow, when the headlines twist this into something ugly? When your team tells you to deny it, to smile and pretend nothing happened? A bitter smile tugged at his lips. Then I'll finally tell them no. That surprised them both. I've spent my whole life doing what's safe, he went on, feeling something inside him harden with resolve. What sells? What keeps me untouchable? Tonight proved that being untouchable is the loneliest place there is. Outside, the crowd began to chant his name again, restless, demanding closure. He didn't turn toward the sound. He kept his eyes on the man in front of him, the only person whose approval mattered right now. "I can't promise it won't be messy," he said. "I can't promise I won't get scared again. But I promise I won't run." The man exhaled slowly, as if letting go of years of held breath. "If I stay," he said, voice trembling despite himself, "it won't be as your secret. I won't disappear when it's inconvenient." "Then don't," he replied. "Stand with me. Even when it's loud. Especially when it's loud." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then, finally, the man nodded, a small, decisive motion that felt heavier than any contract he'd ever signed. "Go finish your show," he said. "Sing like you mean it this time." He hesitated. "Will you be here when I'm done?" A faint, sad smile appeared. "That depends on what you sing." He turned back toward the stage, pulse racing, every step feeling like a choice instead of a routine. When he picked up the microphone again, the lights blinding and the crowd erupting, his voice came out stronger, not because he was fearless, but because he wasn't hiding anymore. And somewhere just beyond the spotlight, someone listened not to the perfection, but to the truth trembling underneath it. The lights burned hotter when he returned to center stage, as if the stadium itself sensed the shift inside him. The chant of his name rolled like thunder, intoxicating and terrifying all at once. He lifted the microphone, fingers steady now, and sang not the version rehearsed 1,000 times, but something stripped and dangerous, a confession disguised as melody. Every lyric landed heavier, every breath carried intent. When the final note faded, the crowd erupted, but he barely heard it. His eyes searched instinctively, desperate, until they found him standing just beyond the barricade, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Backstage was chaos when he finally stepped off. Managers talked over each other, phones already buzzing with notifications, assistants whispering about trending clips and shocked reactions. Someone grabbed his arm, voice tight with panic, telling him the broadcast cut away at the worst possible moment, that social media was exploding. He pulled free, heart pounding, the adrenaline finally giving way to a hollow ache. "Where is he?" he asked, scanning the room. His manager froze. "Who?" "You know who," he snapped, sharper than intended. "Where did he go?" A pause. "Too long, he left," the manager said carefully. "Security said he didn't want to cause a scene." The words hit like ice water. He pushed past everyone, ignoring calls of his name, the taste of fear flooding his mouth. He found him outside near the loading docks, city lights flickering in the distance, the night air cold against flushed skin. "You said you'd stay," he blurted out, breathless. "I said it depended on what you sang," the man replied without turning around. "And you sang beautifully. That doesn't mean I trust you yet." Anger flared, hot and defensive. "So that's it? After everything tonight?" The man turned then, eyes blazing. "Tonight doesn't erase years of silence. It doesn't erase how small you made me feel waiting for you to choose me when no one was watching." The accusation sliced deep because it echoed his own guilt. "I was drowning," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't know how to ask for help. And I was standing right there," the man shot back. "Begging you to let me in." Silence stretched, thick and painful. A car passed nearby, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces, one raw and exposed, the other guarded but trembling at the edges. "You want controversy," the man continued bitterly. "Tomorrow they'll tear you apart. They'll say it was staged, or worse, that it was inappropriate. They'll demand statements and apologies. And I need to know, will you fold again?" He swallowed hard. "If I do," he said quietly, "I want you to walk away. I won't stop you." That seemed to surprise him. "You're really willing to lose me?" "I already almost did," he answered. "I can't survive that twice." For a long moment, the man studied him, searching for performance, for calculation, for the familiar shields. He found none. Only exhaustion. Only truth. "I'm not asking you to give up your career," the man said finally. "I'm asking you to stop treating love like a liability." He nodded, tears blurring his vision. "Then don't be my secret," he said again, firmer this time. "Be my choice." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a reminder that the world was still spinning, waiting to consume whatever decision they made. The man exhaled, shoulders sagging as if he'd been carrying a weight alone for too long. I'm angry, he admitted. I'm hurt. And I'm terrified that I'll believe you and you'll disappear again. I know, he whispered. I'm terrified too. They stood there, two broken halves daring to reach. Slowly, cautiously, the man closed the distance between them. He didn't touch him, not yet, but his voice softened. I'll stay, he said. Not because tonight fixed everything, but because you finally stopped running. Relief crashed through him so hard his knees nearly gave out. He laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound, and wiped his face with the back of his hand. That's more than I deserve. Don't decide that for me, the man replied. Just don't make me ask again if you still need me. He nodded, throat too tight for words. Inside, the headlines were already writing themselves, opinions forming, debates igniting. But out here, under flickering streetlights and the quiet hum of the city, something fragile and real took root. For the first time, he understood that the most terrifying stage wasn't the one with millions watching, it was the one where only one person stood close enough to see him fall. Morning came without mercy. He woke to the vibration of his phone rattling against the nightstand, the screen lighting up with missed calls stacked like accusations. His name was everywhere. Clips of his collapse looped endlessly, slowed down, zoomed in, dissected. Headlines screamed betrayal, bravery, scandal, each one inventing a version of him that felt only half true and entirely out of his control. Beside him, the bed was still warmed. He turned his head slowly, heart stuttering, and found him sitting on the edge of the mattress, already dressed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at nothing. The silence between them felt heavier in daylight, stripped of adrenaline and stage lights. They want a statement, he said hoarsely, breaking the quiet. My manager. The label. Everyone. The man didn't look at him. And what do you want to say? I don't know, he admitted. I've never been good at saying the right thing when it matters. A breath. Controlled. Tense. You've been excellent at saying what's convenient. The words stung. He sat up, sheets pooling around his waist, rubbing his face like he could wipe the guilt away. I'm trying, he said. For the first time, I'm actually trying. The man finally turned, eyes sharp, guarded. Trying means choosing even when it costs you something. Today it's not a stage and a microphone. It's contracts. Endorsements. Fans who think they own you. I know, he said, voice firm despite the fear coiling in his gut. I'm not pretending otherwise. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. They're going to ask you to deny me, the man said quietly. To say it was misunderstood. Emotional exhaustion. Artistic expression. He laughed bitterly. They already did. And I told them I won't lie. That got his full attention. What does that mean? The man asked. It means I won't name you, he said carefully. But I won't erase you either. I won't pretend that what happened wasn't real. A long pause followed, thick with unspoken consequences. That's not enough, the man said at last. Not for me. Fear surged. What are you saying? I'm saying I won't be half acknowledged, he replied, voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. I won't exist only in between lines and careful wording. I've lived in your shadows long enough. I'm not ashamed of you, he said quickly, standing now, panic edging his words. I'm ashamed of myself. Then prove it, the man snapped. Not with songs. Not with tears. With a choice that actually costs. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. He thought of everything he stood to lose, the carefully built image, the fragile peace with the public, the illusion of control. He also thought of the nights alone in hotel rooms, the applause fading into silence, the ache that no award ever touched. He took a shaky breath. Come with me. Where? To the press conference. The man stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Are you serious? Yes, he said, surprising even himself with how certain it felt once spoken. Stand next to me. Let them see that I'm not breaking down over nothing. Let them see what matters. You realize they'll tear me apart too, he said. Speculation. Hate. Obsession. I know, he whispered. And if you say no, I'll understand. I won't ask you to bleed for my mistakes. The man searched his face, looking for hesitation, for calculation. He found only fear and resolve tangled together. "This is insane," he murmured. "I've lived sane," he replied softly. "It almost destroyed me." Minutes later, they stood behind a curtain, the low roar of reporters leaking through like static. He could smell sweat again, feel the familiar pre-performance tremor, but this time there was no song to hide behind. The man's hand brushed his accidentally, then deliberately, fingers lacing for just a second. "Don't let go," he whispered. "I won't," he promised. They stepped out together. Cameras exploded. Voices shouted questions over each other, words like scandal and confession and betrayal hurled without restraint. He felt the old instinct rise, to smile, to deflect, to charm, but he crushed it. "I'm not here to perform," he said into the microphone, voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm here to tell the truth." The room quieted, tension crackling. "What happened on that stage," he continued, "wasn't a breakdown. It was a moment of honesty I'd been running from for years. I've built a career on my voice, but I lost myself by refusing to listen to it." Questions flew. Names were guessed. Accusations sharpened. He reached out then, openly, and took the man's hand. Gasps rippled through the room. "This," he said, heart pounding, "is not a rumor. This is not a mistake. This is the person who stood by me when I couldn't stand myself. And I won't pretend otherwise anymore." The man squeezed his hand hard, emotion flickering across his face, fear, relief, anger, love colliding all at once. The backlash was immediate. Shouts. Outrage. Praise. Condemnation tangled together until it was impossible to separate noise from meaning. But in the middle of it all, he felt something he never had before. Peace. Later, alone again, the adrenaline faded, leaving them raw and shaking. The man pressed his forehead to his, voice breaking despite himself. "You just set fire to your own world." He smiled weakly. "I know. Do you regret it?" He didn't hesitate. Not for a second. The man laughed softly, a sound edged with tears. "Then I'll stay," he said. "Not because it's safe, but because you finally chose me in the light." He pulled him close. No cameras now, no audience, just two people clinging to each other in the aftermath of truth. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like home. The fallout didn't wait for permission. It arrived in the form of slammed doors, voices raised behind glass walls, and a conference room that smelled like cold coffee and panic. He sat at the long table with his hands folded tightly together, knuckles pale, while executives paced like predators circling wounded prey. Screens on the walls replayed the press conference on mute, his hand clasped openly with the man beside him, the image looping again and again as if daring them to erase it. "You blindsided us," one of them said finally, breaking the silence. Years of strategy undone in one impulsive decision. He lifted his gaze, calm on the surface, storm underneath. "I told the truth." "That's not your job," another snapped. "Your job is to sell an image." He exhaled slowly. "Then maybe that's the problem." The room stiffened. Someone scoffed. Someone else muttered about contracts and clauses. He listened, really listened, to the language of control he'd accepted for so long, and felt something in him harden instead of bend. "You're risking everything," the first executive warned. "Tours. Sponsorships. Entire markets could close to you." A flicker of pain crossed his face, but he didn't look away. "If my career only survives when I lie about who I love, then it's already hollow." Silence fell, thick and shocked outside the room. The man waited, leaning against the wall, arms crossed tightly like armor. He'd been asked, politely but firmly, to stay out of the meeting. He hated that. Hated the familiar feeling of being sidelined, erased when things got complicated. His jaw tightened every time a raised voice leaped through the door. When it finally opened, he straightened instinctively. The singer stepped out, shoulders tense, eyes tired but burning with something unmistakable. "Well?" the man asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He reached out instead, fingers brushing the man's wrist in a silent question. Then, with deliberate defiance, he intertwined their hands in full view of the hallway cameras. "They're furious," he said. "They threatened everything." "And you?" the man asked, searching his face. "Did you fold?" A slow smile curved his lips, exhausted but real. No relief hit so hard the man had to look away for a moment, blinking rapidly. You're really doing this, he murmured. I told you, he replied. I won't run. The next days were brutal. Interviews turned aggressive. Comment sections split into war zones. Fans cried, cheered, burned merchandise, sent letters filled with both love and hate. Security tightened. Privacy vanished. Every touch between them was dissected, every glance turned into a headline. One night, after a particularly vicious broadcast that questioned the man's intentions, they argued for the first time since stepping into the light. They're destroying you, the man said sharply, pacing the hotel room. They're saying I'm using you. That I planned this. I know, he replied, sitting on the bed, shoulders slumped. I saw it. And you're just going to let them? His voice cracked despite the anger. You've built this fortress around yourself for years. Why am I the only one standing unprotected? Guilt slammed into him. He stood abruptly, crossing the room in 2 strides. You think I don't feel that, he said, heat rising. You think I don't want to scream at every screen that they're wrong? Then why don't you? The man shot back. Why do I still feel like I'm fighting alone? The words hung between them, dangerous and true. He flinched, then forced himself to stay present. Because I'm scared, he admitted. Not of losing them. Of losing you if I say the wrong thing. The man's anger faltered, replaced by something softer but no less painful. Loving you shouldn't feel like walking through fire, he whispered. I know, he said, voice breaking. But I'm learning how to burn without turning to ash. The man laughed bitterly. You always talk in metaphors when you're afraid. A weak smile flickered. You always notice. They stood there, raw and shaking, until the man finally stepped forward and pressed his forehead against his chest, breathing him in like grounding. I don't need you to be fearless, he said quietly. I need you to be here. He wrapped his arms around him, holding on like the world might rip them apart at any moment. I am, he promised. Even when it's ugly. The true shock came weeks later, when he walked onto a smaller stage, no spectacle, no dancers, no safety net. Just a piano, a microphone, and silence heavy with expectation. The label hadn't approved this. The song wasn't cleared. The risk was undeniable. He looked out into the crowd, then down at the man standing in the wings, eyes wide with a mix of fear and pride. This song, he said into the mic, voice steady, isn't for charts. It's for the person who asked me the one question I was too afraid to answer. The first note trembled. Then his voice found its footing, raw and imperfect, carrying lyrics that bared his doubts, his need, his love without disguise. The audience didn't scream. They listened. Some cried. Some sat frozen, confronted with a truth that couldn't be edited or spun. When he finished, the applause came slowly, then all at once, overwhelming and real. Backstage, the man grabbed him, emotion spilling over. You just burned every bridge, he said breathlessly. He smiled through tears. Or built a new one. The man kissed him then, not hidden, not rushed, but full and unashamed. And in that moment, amid the chaos and controversy, he understood something profound. He hadn't lost his voice, he had finally found what it was for. The backlash reached its peak the night his phone stopped ringing. Not because the storm had passed, but because the people who once controlled every breath he took had decided silence would hurt more than threats. He stood in the kitchen of the apartment they now shared, the city glowing coldly through the windows, unread messages stacked on his screen. He hadn't been invited to the emergency board meeting. No calls from his label. No instructions. Just a void where authority used to be. They're freezing you out, the man said quietly from behind him. He nodded once. It's a punishment. For what? The man asked, though they both knew the answer. For not apologizing for loving you. The words landed heavy in the room. The man crossed his arms, jaw tightening. Then say it out loud. Say you don't regret it. He turned, eyes blazing. I don't regret it. Louder, the man pressed. Say it like you mean it. I don't regret choosing you, he snapped, emotion finally spilling over. I regret every year I let fear convince me I had to be alone to be successful. The man stepped closer, voice shaking with restrained fury. Then why do I still feel like I'm waiting for the moment you'll be told to let me go? Because he was waiting for that moment too. The truth burned his throat. Because I was trained to believe love is temporary and profit is permanent, he admitted. And unlearning that feels like ripping my skin off. The man stared at him, pain and love colliding violently in his eyes. I won't survive being your rebellion phase, he said. I need to know this isn't just you reacting to pressure. That accusation hit harder than any headline. You think this is temporary, he demanded. You think I would destroy my career for a phase? I think, the man said, voice cracking, that you're still figuring out who you are without the machine telling you. Silence followed, raw and dangerous. He laughed suddenly, sharp and broken. They terminated my contract today. The man froze. What? Not officially, he continued. But they sent the paperwork. Indefinite suspension. Creative disagreements. Shock flickered, then fear. You didn't tell me. I wanted to see your face, he said softly. I needed to know if you'd still look at me the same when I wasn't untouchable. The man's eyes filled despite his effort to stay composed. You idiot, he whispered, stepping forward and gripping his shirt. You absolute idiot. He let himself be grabbed. Say it. Say you're leaving. Instead, the man pulled him into a hard, desperate kiss, all anger and relief and terror tangled together. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. You don't get to test me like that, the man said fiercely. I stayed when you had everything. I'm not leaving because you lost it. Emotions surged violently, knocking the air from his lungs. I don't know how to do this without the structure, he admitted. Without the rules. Without someone telling me who I'm supposed to be. Good, the man said. Now you're finally free enough to choose. Freedom didn't feel glorious. It felt terrifying. The controversy escalated anyway. Rumors leaked about power struggles, about him being difficult, unstable, ungrateful. Former allies distanced themselves. Invitations vanished. He watched his name get dragged through narratives he didn't recognize. One night, overwhelmed, he snapped. I should have played along, he said bitterly, pacing the living room. I should have apologized, smiled, promised to be careful. This didn't have to be so violent. The man turned sharply. Don't you dare. What? Don't rewrite history to make oppression feel comfortable, he said coldly. You didn't break anything. They did. He stopped pacing. What if I ruined us? You didn't, the man replied immediately. You revealed who would stand with you. And who won't, he muttered. Yes, he said. Including parts of yourself you've outgrown. The words sank in slowly. Weeks later, he stepped into a small studio, independent, stripped of prestige, buzzing with quiet rebellion. No label. No handlers. Just musicians who cared about sound more than safety. The man sat on the floor during the recording, back against the wall, watching him with an intensity that made his chest ache. Between takes, he confessed things he'd never put into lyrics before. His fear of being replaceable. His habit of self-erasure. His belief that love was something to be earned through perfection. You don't have to bleed to be worthy, the man said softly during a break. I know, he replied. But bleeding is all I was taught. One song, raw and unfinished, made the producer pause. This is dangerous, she said. People will hear this and assume it's about him. He didn't look away from the man when he answered. It is. The release went live without warning. No marketing. No apology. Just truth. The reaction was explosive. Fans split again, but this time, something shifted. The narrative cracked. People heard vulnerability instead of scandal. They recognized themselves in the fractures of his voice. That night, lying exhausted beside the man, he whispered, "What if this is as big as it ever gets again?" The man smiled softly in the dark. "Then it'll finally be yours." He closed his eyes, breathing him in, understanding at last that losing control hadn't destroyed him. It had stripped him down to something real. The quiet came slowly, not as an absence, but as a presence, soft, steady, earned. Months passed without announcements or countdowns. No comeback teasers, no carefully curated apologies. Just mornings where sunlight slipped through half-open curtains, where coffee went cold because conversations lingered too long, where music existed again without deadlines attached to it. He learned how silence sounded when it wasn't punishment. One evening, he sat at the piano with the window open, city air drifting in, carrying distant laughter and traffic. His fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant in a way they hadn't been since he was young. The man sat on the couch behind him, reading, pretending not to watch, but always watching. "You're stalling," the man said gently. He smiled faintly. "I know. Afraid?" "Yes." "Good," he replied. "That means it matters." He exhaled and played. The melody was simple, unpolished. No dramatic build, no desperate reach for perfection. His voice followed quietly, almost uncertain at first, then warmer as it found its truth. The song wasn't about loss or rebellion or anger. It was about staying. About choosing. About the terrifying intimacy of being seen without armor. When he finished, he didn't look back right away. He waited. The room stayed still. Then he felt arms wrap around his shoulders from behind, a forehead resting gently against his neck. "That," the man whispered, voice thick, "is the first time I've heard you sing without trying to survive." His chest tightened. "Is it enough?" The man kissed his temple. "It's everything." They released the song quietly, without spectacle. It didn't break records. It didn't need to. It found the people it was meant for, the ones who had felt disposable, conditional, afraid to ask if they were still needed. Messages came in slowly, deeply personal, not screaming but sincere. He read one late at night, tears blurring the screen. Someone wrote that the song gave them the courage to stay alive. Another said it helped them tell the truth for the first time. He put the phone down and covered his face, shaking. The man held him without saying a word. "I spent my whole life believing my worth depended on how many people listened," he said eventually, voice raw. "I never learned how to believe one person could be enough." The man pulled back just enough to look at him. "I never asked to be everything," he said softly. "I just wanted to be real." He nodded, tears slipping free. "I know. And I am." Finally. They walked one night past a small venue advertising an open mic. No posters. No security. Just a handwritten sign and muffled music inside. He stopped. The man raised an eyebrow. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I think," he said slowly, heart racing, "I want to sing without being introduced." Inside, the room was dim and crowded and alive. He took the stage without a name, without expectation. When he sang, no one screamed. No one filmed. They listened, and when he finished, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was honest. Later, walking home hand in hand, "The city quieter now," he said, "that question you asked me on stage." The man glanced at him. "Do you still need me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "But not because I'm broken." "Then why?" "Because I choose you," he replied. "Even when I'm whole." The man smiled, eyes shining in the dark, and for the first time in his life, the singer understood the truth he had been chasing through every note and every ovation. He hadn't shattered because of the question. He had shattered because the answer finally set him free.